Next topic is a really, really interesting topic. Definitely a topic that I was like, wow, this is important, this is interesting, I didn't know something about. And the person here to present that is Claire. Claire has managed to do a lot of interesting things in this life. Intern for the House Committee, I believe it's Science Committee, but I think there's another word in there in addition to science. Also work at St. Jude's Children's Hospital, and is a co-author on a paper coming out about microcephaly, I believe, pretty soon. And Claire has also been in the circus. And if you know Claire, that's not surprising at all. It actually makes sense. And it's just like, it's really cool that somebody is able to do such like really interesting technical work. And you'll see this project is about green hydrogen, making steel with carbon-free hydrogen, basically. And it's a very difficult, thorny problem to solve. But somebody who can work on something this technical and also, you know, be clever and funny and able to like walk on a wire 16 feet above the ground or whatever it is. It's just impressive. And I think it speaks to just the range of things that folks in this group this year have done. And I think all of that range that everybody has really brought unique characteristics to this group and really made it, like I said earlier, more of a team than like an academic program. And that's for all of you. But yeah, we're going to talk about something that you probably didn't know. Steel making is important, and it takes a lot of carbon, and Claire's going to tell us how we can move on from that whole carbon steel thing. That's all I gotta say.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Corey, for the introduction. I think that you overestimate my circus career, but that's a story for a different day. Thank you to everyone who's gone so far in my cohort. It's been a really enjoyable day and year. And thank you to everyone who is listening, both here and via the live stream. I really appreciate your interest. Okay. Great. All right, my name is Claire Levesque, and I will be talking about green new steel, opportunities, insights, and barriers for green hydrogen and U.S. steel production. Here's a brief overview of what we'll be discussing today, starting with steel, alternatives, using hydrogen in steel, the limitations to that hydrogen, U.S. policy, and I'll end it with some recommendations. But first, some underlying assumptions for my project as a whole is that the United States needs to be proactive in its mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. If we want to attain net zero emissions by 2050 and deeper decarbonization plans, then hard-to-abate sectors must be included in those plans. This includes making things like steel, cement, and plastics, and getting places like by plane or by ship. For these sectors, alternative energy carriers are necessary where electrification is physically improbable or impossible. Which leads me to steel. Steel is an integral pillar to modern society. It's in our infrastructure, buildings, cars, appliances, pens. As you can see from the graph on the left, demand globally for steel has more than doubled in the last 20 years. The US alone passed a $3 trillion infrastructure bill last year, and making more steel will be necessary to ensure that its plans are fulfilled. The vast majority of steel is made in China. The US is the fourth greatest producer of steel, but third in apparent steel consumption. So what this means is that we import a great deal to meet our demand at home. The global steel industry is responsible for 7% of direct CO2 emissions, so it's a major contributor to climate change. Steel and cement are the most emissions-intensive industrial processes, and when I say emissions-intensive, I mean that for every ton of steel you create, about twice as much CO2 is emitted in the process. But this is a global average, and not all steel is made in the same way, as I had to find out. There are three main methods to creating steel. You can create new steel, or you may recycle steel. But at its core, steel is reduced iron with a little bit of carbon sprinkled in for strength. To reduce iron, which is Fe2O3 or Fe3O4, you have to remove the oxygen from iron ore concentrate. And to do this, you need an element that is more willing to bind to oxygen than the iron itself. Think carbon, or which likes to bind to oxygen to create CO2, or hydrogen to form water. New steel production removes this oxygen via a blast furnace, as you can see on the left. This uses a reducing agent, typically carbon from coal in the form of coke, via high temperature combustion. You may also produce new steel using a method known as the direct reduced iron process. This directly reduces iron using carbon from methane and natural gas without directly melting the metal. So it's a little bit less emissions and carbon intensive. But you can also recycle steel in a process known as the electric arc furnace, where discarded scrap, most commonly from automobiles, is melted using electricity powered by natural gas, typically in the US, to be molded for new use. It's difficult to reduce emissions from the steel sector because these plants have exceedingly long lifespans, they have a cheap feedstock in the form of fossil fuels, and they require high temperature combustion in the case of the blast furnace, blast oxygen furnace, and or a strong reducing agent in the case of direct reduced iron. The majority of steel in the United States is either recycled or imported. The US is the world's greatest net importer of steel, and 72% of our steelmaking capacity utilizes the electric arc furnace to recycle steel. If I'm saying steel too much, I apologize. It's almost necessary. However, it's expected that demand for steel will increase between 25 and 50% by 2050, so there are concerns that our rate of recycling will not be able to meet this growing demand. This problem further cements our reliance on emissions-intensive steel imports unless we were to make fundamental changes. To reduce emissions, the World Steel Association, the leading international trade body for steel, suggests 3 options to clean up the industry. These include improving efficiency at existing plants, maximizing recycling using the electric arc furnace, and developing and deploying low-carbon technologies. I believe the low-carbon technologies approach is the most underutilized because it would require the most fundamental changes. It would require massive federal investment and policy to push steel companies to adopt new methods of production. Despite the challenge, however, countries around the world have already begun demonstration projects to showcase the viability of alternative technologies. One of which being hydrogen DRI. This is by no means the only method that's being researched currently to reduce emissions in the sector, but is highly promising. Hydrogen DRI is very similar to the DRI process we just discussed, which is direct reduced iron. Iron ore concentrate is pelletized into small pellets and then fed into a furnace for reduction to remove that oxygen, and melted in an electric arc furnace to remove impurities, add strength, and be molded. Should the carbon from methane in the iron-making step be replaced with hydrogen, the system can achieve 70% emissions reductions should the hydrogen be clean, which I'll get to in a minute. If the electric arc furnace step and the iron ore pelletization step are powered by renewable energy, the process itself achieves 92 to 95% emissions reductions compared to traditional blast furnace and DRI processes. This approach, and this indicates just that. This approach has shown viability in projects throughout the EU. Japan and China have showcased pilot projects as well, and demonstration projects and full-scale deployment are planned within the next 5 years around the world, but not in the US. The US has yet to invest in pilot projects or demonstration projects for hydrogen DRI. This is due in part to some of the limitations of hydrogen, most notably being the cost to produce it. So hydrogen is an energy carrier, not a source of energy. So what this means is that you have to produce it or remove it from the compounds it naturally inhabits in order to tap into that potential. Think water, methane, from natural gas. Similar to electricity, however, hydrogen is only as clean as its production process. Gray hydrogen is the dominant method for producing hydrogen today. This utilizes fossil fuels as the input source, and it costs about $1 per kilogram to make. We typically use gray hydrogen for oil refining and ammonia production, and it costs about $1 per kilogram to make. However, gray hydrogen is highly emissions intensive, So for every 1 kilogram of hydrogen you produce in the United States using gray production methods, you emit 21 kilograms of CO2. Wow. Alternative methods of hydrogen production are considered much cleaner. Blue hydrogen adds carbon capture and storage to existing gray hydrogen facilities, but carbon capture and storage is still in early stages, and we're unsure how effective it is in practice or how permanent it would be to store the carbon dioxide captured and how safe that process is in itself. Green hydrogen, meanwhile, utilizes water as the feed input of hydrogen and renewable energy-powered electrolysis to separate the hydrogen out. Oxygen is the lone byproduct. However, green hydrogen is extremely expensive compared to traditional methods, and it's not yet competitive. In addition, gray hydrogen, there's really no penalty to create gray hydrogen using fossil fuels in the United States, so there's really no incentive to switch to green, whether that be in steel or elsewhere. But if we want to achieve net zero emissions and deeper decarbonization goals, green hydrogen must reach cost parity with the traditional gray hydrogen. To better understand the future of H2, I analyzed technical reports from groups like McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, IEA, IRENA, and Bloomberg. Each report assumes a significant role for clean hydrogen in achieving our decarbonization plans. Fundamentally, demand for hydrogen is expected to increase, and the cost to produce it is expected to decrease. Each predicts green hydrogen to reach cost parity with blue hydrogen at $2 per kilogram by 2030. Deeper policy incentives will support green hydrogen becoming cost competitive with gray. These forecasts, among other developments, have inspired over 30 national hydrogen strategies around the world, and countries have pledged to increase the capacity of hydrogen production 400 times its current level by 2030. The US does not currently have a hydrogen strategy nor commitments to increasing hydrogen capacity to a certain level. This is mostly because the vast majority of US hydrogen policy has focused on hydrogen fuel cells for passenger vehicles over the last 50 years. And we all know how many hydrogen-powered cars are on the road today. The last 3 to 4 years, though, US policy has shifted to support lowering the production costs of clean hydrogen for diverse end use. For example, the Department of Energy's Hydrogen Fuel Cell and Technologies Office announced the Hydrogen Shot last year, which aims to reduce the cost of green hydrogen to $1 per kilogram by 2031. The DOE aims to leverage R&D, policy, and private capital to improve both the scale and deployment of clean hydrogen. Another method to reduce the overall clean hydrogen cost and encourage deployment is to co-locate renewable energy resource generation to power green hydrogen production, and to co-locate those processes with its desired end use. The bipartisan infrastructure bill does just this. The infrastructure bill authorizes $9.5 billion for clean hydrogen, including supporting R&D, a national hydrogen strategy for the US, and clean regional hydrogen hubs. The R&D itself will address clean hydrogen limitations, like production cost, and the hubs themselves will address the demonstration to showcase viability. $8 billion is authorized for at least 4 hydrogen hubs, one of which being green. And the green hydrogen hub must demonstrate end use in one of the following end use sectors. It may choose to demonstrate end use in electricity generation, residential heating, transportation, or industry. Which leads to my recommendations. And these are that the green hydrogen hub should be dedicated for end use in the industrial sector, which would include steel production. As mentioned, the US has yet to support demonstration projects in hydrogen DRI, and the green hydrogen hub would create an opportunity to do so. But the green hydrogen hub should also be co-located with regions of high potential renewable capacity and existing steel capacity, as we have seen with the hydrogen DRI projects that have showcased success abroad that already have that utilize the electric arc furnace for that final step. This would also reduce transportation costs and efficiency losses. The benefits of this endeavor are shown here. Onshoring steel capacity in the long term can reduce the United States' reliance on imports while increasing domestic production of a global commodity. Hydrogen hubs must demonstrate significant job creation per the infrastructure bill, which would support both creation and training of the blue-collar workforce. The demonstration projects themselves would boost our competitiveness with other countries demonstrating low-carbon technologies. And in the long term, hydrogen DRI would eventually reduce emissions in the steel sector at a large scale, if implemented. So to demonstrate co-location, I developed these maps using data from the NREL and Global Energy Monitor to show existing steel capacity, which are indicated by the dots. The black dots indicate electric arc furnaces where that recycling takes place. Green is DRI. Wind is especially strong in the Midwest, and Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, and Minnesota all have existing steel capacity. So these should be considered when choosing a green hydrogen hub. Additionally, same. This map shows potential solar capacity, which is very strong in the American West and Southwest. Arizona, Colorado, and Utah all have existing steel capacity. But should a hybrid option be considered, I believe Kansas is an excellent candidate because it has strong wind and solar and 2 electric arc furnaces. So when I set out to do this project, I wanted to know how we could push the envelope forward. How do we reduce emissions from a sector as emissions intensive and as powerful and as big as steel? You can't just force steelmakers to make this switch, as we have seen in the United States. We need to leverage policy to first demonstrate the viability of alternatives, and then down the road, policy can be used to support deployment through actions like production tax credits, investment tax credits, government contracts with hydrogen DRI plants, and the like. But in the meantime, we need to take advantage of the window of opportunity that is the Green Hydrogen Hub, which has opened up an opportunity for hydrogen DRI in a risky yet necessary step for decarbonization. I'd like to thank my committee for your unwavering support. Thank you to my family and friends, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Hi, great presentation. Thank you very much. Texas, you mentioned them in the talk as being a potential place because there is steel manufacturing there. My understanding, not being a Texan myself, looking at it from the outside, is that it seems to be pretty resilient, and well, resilient is a weird word, antagonistic to sort of green measures and policy that would enact some sort of positive environmental change or anything. It seems mostly steadfastly, nope, this is how we've been doing it, this is how we're going to do it. Do you have any thoughts on what sort of policy kind of presentation this could be wrapped up in to help incentivize perhaps those who are more resistant to this type of concept to sort of start adopting it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, a really tough question. But to start, I think that there is a great deal of incentive from these hubs themselves, from the infrastructure bill. Each hub will be given $2 billion to support development, and they must demonstrate significant job creation in their proposal, and that would give them preferential treatment to be chosen as a hub. So I think that there are some major benefits from the infrastructure bill itself to kind of sway states that aren't necessarily jumping at the opportunity to implement greener alternatives. But yeah, it's a really hard question. We shall see. Yeah, of course.
Fantastic job. Love the presentation. Love you. So you were talking about for gray hydrogen, I'm going to take this off. For gray hydrogen, like the ratio of like the carbon emissions you get out compared to like hydrogen is like really bad. Why is it done in those cases? Is like the hydrogen needed for something specifically, or it's just like in the research stages?
Yeah, so hydrogen, most traditionally produced in this gray method, it's necessary component to oil refining, ammonia production, petrochemical production, and other chemicals. So hydrogen is necessary already, and it's a pretty old industry, surprisingly, and so that is just like the way it's always been, and so and there's really no policy in place to discourage that. Subtle plug for carbon price, but so yeah, so it's necessary for those sectors.
Hi, great job, Claire. So I noticed that a lot of this green hydrogen is made using electrolysis. Has there been any investigations into like more bio-based methods of making hydrogen, like microbial ways or using enzymes, stuff like that?
Yes, there's some really cool there's some really cool research being done, especially by national labs, and one of which being molten oxide electrolysis, which uses strictly electricity. But yes, in terms of the microbial pathways, there's a lot that still needs to be done, but some very promising early starts to it. That was a major limitation of this report, just focusing on electrolysis for sake of time. But some very cool things to look into. Thank you.